An MEP for Renew Europe from France, sitting as chair of PECH committee at the European Parliament, and also as a co-chair of the Sustainable Fisheries and Aquaculture Working Group under the umbrella of the Intergroup. So it's with great pleasure to have you with us today. Right on time, before we start the discussion, just some housekeeping rules for the audience. First of all, the event is recorded, so the recording will be made available as of tomorrow at the website of the European Parliament Intergroup. This is also the case for presentations. Of course, following the green light of speakers, we will make sure that we share this on the relevant website page. And last but not least, as we want to have a discussion as interactive as possible, I would like to remind online participants that you can send us your questions via the Q&A box of the platform. That should appear at the right-hand side of your screen. So you can post your questions over there, and please make sure to mention the option all panelists so we can see all the questions as soon as they pop up. And of course, for participants in the room, the process is simpler. You can just raise your hand and we'll make sure to take as many questions as possible, given the time consideration as well. So once again, thank you all for joining us today. And I leave the official welcome remarks of the event to Mr. Karleskind to set the scene.
Thank you. Thank you all, and good morning. Welcome in the European Parliament for those who are not don't work here. Well, first, let's enjoy one thing is that ocean is inside the negotiation in the COP27. You remember that several years ago that was not the case, and thanks to the mobilization of all actors, NGO officials, member of the European Parliament, this has been included, and this is really a good thing because we know that the ocean is impacted, but also ocean is a source of solution. We are here today to talk about how we can make sure that fisheries, aquaculture are in line and can contribute and will adapt to what we need to do to tackle climate change and to adapt to climate change. Just a few reminders at the beginning of this conference. We need these food sources. We know that a part of humanity relies on it to get proteins. But we also know that this can be part of the solution. This must be a part of the solution. And we need first to fish in ways that respect the resource, and in fact that respect marine food. We have to highlight some of the efforts here in Europe. We have still to do to reach sustainable fishery in all our marine basins, marine regions, but we also have to highlight the efforts, the progress that have been achieved during the last years, the last 10 years, last 15 years, especially in the Atlantic Ocean. But we have also to highlight that marine food are mainly sustainable food. The emission of CO2 when you consume a kilogram of marine food is almost always lower than when you eat terrestrial meat. This must be highlighted because this is first figure that we sometime forget. This doesn't mean that we don't need to improve our practices, but this is something that we shouldn't forget. If you, I read a recent, not that recent, some years ago, a study on the emission of mussels, for example. Mussels, if you manage well the share after the consumptions of a negative budget, CO2 budget. This is something that we have to keep in mind because this means that we can also have some solutions in this and way of producing proteins, quality proteins that have positive impact on the CO2 budget. There is something that we have to highlight is that if we want to have sustainable fishery, we have to manage the ocean in a way that give it more possibility to store CO2. This is really something important. I remember some years ago, I was here in Brussels, invited by the Commission when I was Vice President of the Brittany region. This was a seminary, a conference on the of the MSFD, Marine Strategy Work Directive. The conference was named HOPE, and I always remember this HOPE, Healthy Ocean Productive Ecosystem. We have to think this. If we want to have productive ecosystem that ensure sustainable fisheries, that ensure stability, visibility, and incomes for the fishery sector, we have to have healthy ocean. Productive ocean ecosystem needs healthy ocean. And if we want the ocean to be efficient in store the CO2, we need an healthy ocean. So we can see that these are two things that contribute to good fishery sector, healthy fishery sector, and healthy ocean. This is really something important. I would like to highlight something also, is that we have to use every leverage we have. And we also have to use, when we can, and as much as we can, the activities of fisheries and aquaculture to protect the ocean. I would like to give a simple example. There is something that I don't know if I should say we are making bad, but I think that we're still doing it. Aquaculture. This is not bad. I'm not saying that aquaculture is bad, but simply, during years, we've been saying aquaculture is the solution. That's right, in a way. This is where we see that since the 90s, the production of seafood by aquaculture is increasing. This is an answer to the demand of seafood products. We can see that now it's almost the same as what we produce by fishing in the world. But in some areas, we've been destroying mangroves for creating farms, aquaculture farms. But we also know that mangroves is one of the three main ecosystems that take carbon from the atmosphere. So we really have to ask ourselves if we are in the right way. I don't think so. But we have also examples of some aquaculture that protect the mangroves. And I've seen this really interesting research program in French Guiana of the oysters of Montsineri. In fact, they have just studied how they are farming oysters. This is a traditional farming in this city, village on the sea. And they used to cut the roots of the, how do you say palétuvier in English? Well, the trees in the mangrove to collect the oysters. But they understand that if they change the way of farming, they can protect and they don't need to cut the roots. So they are now, by this simple research program, the evolution of the way they do it, they have an economic activity and they know that by keeping the roots, they have more ways to have a better production of oysters, and in the same time, they protect the mangroves. So we can see that we can find win-win solution. We really need to understand how we can use the activities, the fishing activity, the aquaculture activities, to protect the environment, to find common benefits. This is really something that matters. And for that, there is no secret. We have to work together, of course, and that's why we are all around the table from various sectors, NGOs, stakeholders, public authorities, but also research. And this is not by chance that we are in the oceanic decades from the UN. But we also have something really important from the Commission. It's the Mission Ocean from DG RTD. Is it always RTD, the DG in charge of research? No, well, research. RNI, sorry. Although I'm almost old here. Sorry, but we know that we have to go into research. I was just talking about this research program in Montigny in French Guiana. We have to untap the unknown potential of the ocean. I'm an oceanographer and I know how and small our unknown knowledge on the ocean. We have to find a way of using, as well as research from academic institutions, as well as the knowledge of the local population and of the aquaculture farmers and of the fishermen. They also have a knowledge that we need to use, something I am really convinced on. So in conclusion, because I don't want to be long and I think that we will have some interesting talks. The first thing is that I'm sorry, I can't stay with you during all the conference. We will need thousands of solutions because there is no one solution to tackle climate change and to adapt to climate change. That's why we need to brainstorm all around that. But what I know is that there are solutions. Sustainable fishing, sustainable aquaculture are possible, and I'm really convinced that they will lead to a better possibility of tackling climate change, thanks to the ocean. So have a good conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Karleskind, for your remarks, setting the scene with regards to the discussion to follow, but also for your leadership driving the European Parliament agenda forward. Our next speaker is Ms. Vera Agostini, who is connected online, and we have taken note of a presentation that we will be sharing shortly. Of course, Ms. Vera Agostini is the Deputy Director for Fisheries and Aquaculture Division within FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. So, Ms. Agostini, it's with great pleasure to have you with us today, and the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you at this event. I only wish I could have attended in person, but as you know, these days we do a lot of things virtually, and I just couldn't be with you today. Hopefully there'll be another opportunity. What I want to spend the next few minutes on is really focus on the state of play of UN climate negotiations. There's a lot that we could have told you about, the science of climate and fisheries, some of the work we're doing, but really here we're going to focus on the state of play of UN climate negotiations. Next slide, please. Now, in recent years, here we've laid out the milestones in global processes. In recent years, we are witnessing an increasing awareness of countries, as I'm sure you've all noticed, on the nexus between the ocean and climate change. Now, this increasing awareness is a result of parties, is partly a result of discussions within the UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention of Climate Change. And this started back in 2009, which is what this slide illustrates. Now here we have also tried to highlight a few milestones, such as the first Ocean Day at the UNFCCC COP15, then the COP22, where Ocean Day was admitted in the official zone of the COP, where the negotiations take place. Then, of course, the release of the report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change on Ocean and Cryosphere. Then we had the Blue COP, namely COP25, that mobilized a lot of attention on the ocean. Where essentially what happened, and then after that, we had the 2020 UNFCCC Ocean Dialogue, where the official inclusion of the ocean into climate negotiation was starting to be discussed. And then we had the Glasgow Climate Pact coming out of COP26, which firmly included ocean under UNFCCC and mandated ocean dialogues to be held annually. With the first one that took place in June 2022, and finally COP27, where we are now. So, and we really hope that this COP will lead to more guidance and a concrete work plan on how to integrate the ocean under UNFCCC processes. So as our speaker at the beginning said, there should be a lot of joy for this, as this is really firmly in the COP right now. Next slide. With this next slide, we wanted to give you just a quick overview of FAO's work on climate, which is pretty diverse and widespread across the globe. On one hand, we're contributing to build this momentum on the ocean within the COP, and we have our staff is there now, the UNFCCC COP. And FAO initiated putting together information on climate change impacts and adaptation options around about 15 years ago with different areas of work. And this is what we illustrate in this slide. The first one is an adaptation program to implement projects on the ground in collaboration with governments and the involvement, of course, of communities to reduce vulnerability of fishers and fish farmers to climate change and natural disasters. And in this plot, you can see the wide diversity of where those projects are taking place. The second area of work is the strengthening of the knowledge base and the development of adaptation guidance with an adaptation toolbox really at the core of that. This includes the standards and requirements for adaptation, such as, for example, ensuring adherence to human rights standards. And it also has adaptation approaches for specific areas, such as disaster risk reduction and management of fisheries and aquaculture. Now, the third area of work is mitigation work. Despite being a minor contributor to global carbon emissions, the fisheries and aquaculture sector has significant mitigation potential. And I was in a side event on the COP on this that really outlined some very interesting aspects of this. Now, FAO's mitigation work focuses on identifying opportunities for renewable energy in small-scale fisheries value chains, accounting fuel use and carbon emission in industrial fisheries, that's another area, and quantifying and mitigating emission from aquaculture. So we do a bit on mitigation, as you can see. Next slide. And this is my final slide. Here we just wanted to kind of summarize for you some of our entry points in the climate negotiations. Some of the key things that we highlight and we try to really disseminate information on at the climate negotiation. The first one is blue transformation. We talk a lot about that with measurable climate resilient objectives to achieve Paris Agreement goals and sustainable development collectively. The second entry point is aquatic food systems, both marine and inland fisheries and aquaculture, at the center of climate solution. The initial speaker talked about solutions, and really aquatic food systems are a key part of that. Then another entry point is empowering the most vulnerable, including small island developing states and small-scale fisheries and aquaculture communities to be critical hubs of climate actions. FAO, with the mandate that it has, of course, this is one of our key entry points. Move from solutions to implementation with adequate support from climate finance, critical piece in the puzzle. Recognizing that strengthening management is often the best adaptation option. Promoting decarbonization of aquatic food value chain, as I explained in my earlier slide. And then the importance of integrated approaches to address the nexus of climate change, ocean, biodiversity, poverty reduction, equity, and human rights. All these things are connected, and we are really looking at approaches for how we work on those connections. And then improving collaboration and partnerships, of course, across the UN system and beyond. Partnerships are really important in any part of our work, and of course, this is true also for our work on the climate sphere. Thank you for this time to share some of these thoughts.
Thank you very much, Ms. Agostini, for presenting us FAO's work and the state of play of UN climate negotiations, the implications for fisheries and aquaculture, but also more details on the importance of the ocean climate nexus. Our next speaker is Ms. Isabelle Garçon, advisor for international affairs at DG Mare in the European Commission. So I think this is an intervention we're all very much looking forward to. So with no further ado, Ms. Garçon, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your kind words. Thanks to Mr. Karleskind and Mrs. Agostini, I will skip my introductory part, which were key progress in climate and ocean nexus 1, 2, important to consider the impacts of seafood production, but also the important positive contributions they can make if we are smart. So that's being done. I will focus on my intervention essentially what can we do and what the EU is trying to do. Having said that, essentially very synthetically, 3 things, if I may. Plenty of things we should do and can do, but I summarize in 3 points. The first one is that the EU has set neutrality for its whole, let's say, society and economy by 2050 into law. That means that we also must reduce greenhouse emissions from marine activities, and that means decarbonizing the fishing and aquaculture sector. Why am I starting by that? Not because they are huge emitters, but because the current energy crisis has highlighting the dependency on fossil fuels and endangers the economic sustainability of this sector in the EU. So therefore, the Commission is working on an initiative that will be presented early next year to address the issue of fuel dependency and help in accelerating the transition to a carbon neutral fishing fleet and carbon neutral aquaculture. The second, and that's really the core of the matter, I should say, is that nature should be at the core of our action. We've said that the ocean can and must provide climate change mitigation. It can and it should increase carbon uptake and storage, and therefore we need healthy oceans, as Mr. Karleskind rightly underlined. Let's remind us that 6 months ago, the Commission proposed a legislation on nature restoration in line with the biodiversity strategy. This is key. This is really key to achieve by 2030 a strong part of marine areas in the EU that are protected and therefore are capable, amongst other things, to store CO2 and be healthy in terms of also producing, well, food, let's say food. Because when it comes to food production from the ocean, we also obviously have to see that the other major recent crisis, COVID, and of course the unprovoked war on Ukraine, underlines new or renewed food security issues, including for the EU, and also highlights furthermore the need to change the way we produce and consume food. So all this taken together, how can we go about it? Essentially 2 avenues. The first one is that based on experience, only effectively managed fisheries can contribute to a sustainable food system. We have been moving in the right direction, where our fish stocks are regenerating, our fleet has been recording greater profits, and healthy ecosystems can go on. But essentially, from taking us back to the economic dimension of sustainability leads to profitability. But we can do better, and soon the Commission will publish a report on the implementation on the common fisheries policy on the one hand, and an action plan, biodiversity and fisheries. As you see, we're trying to go on several legs in terms of doing better. And obviously, on the other hand, we should also do more to unlock the sustainability potential of aquaculture. By the way, I hope you've noticed that and will read it if not already done. Yesterday, the Commission published a new strategy to foster algae production for food and not for food, but still. So we are really taking it very seriously that we can and should also look at these new forms of aquaculture, which are both a source of healthy proteins for food, but also can be, let's say, new ways of cultivating the ocean. Let us be clear as well that globally, essentially globally, the global growth of aquaculture should not come at the expense of the environment or social conditions. So we also taking that very seriously when we work at a global level. Finally, or let's say third point that I want to focus on, this has been also highlighted, science must underpin our policies. And here I'm planning to a large extent the global and the European. Knowledge gaps need to be addressed, including improving the quantification of ocean carbon storage capabilities and the understanding of climate-driven ecosystem tipping points. We are probably reaching them. So we need to have a smart and strong combination of, let's say, different levels of action. At international level, the EU advocates for an international panel on ocean science. So this is how we can better incorporate the science that comes from UNFCCC processes, obviously, and on the other hand, the traditional, let's say, marine scientific world. On EU level, as mentioned by Mr. Karleskind, the EU mission on ocean is not only about research, but certainly will mobilize lots of research on different levels to foster our science-based policy. And finally, from the fisheries more focused point of view, our ability to incorporate this knowledge into seafood production and fisheries management must be improved. Climate change is a major component of better understanding the interaction between fisheries and ecosystems, and vice versa, the health of ecosystems on fisheries stocks. So we are working to incorporating into ecosystem-based management of EU and international fisheries, also the climate dimension. It's a process that has started years ago, but needs to accelerate in terms of fisheries being based on an ecosystem approach, and this ecosystem approach, amongst other things, incorporating the climate change impacts into its various parameters, so that our fisheries policy is better adapted to tackle the various dimensions of the interaction between fisheries and the wider ecosystems. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Garçon, for your intervention. I think there is a lot of key messages there for us to take home today. It was mentioned, of course, the leadership of the European Union in setting climate neutrality by 2015 to law. So thanks a lot to the European Commission for prioritizing as well decarbonization and helping us accelerate the transition. As was mentioned, nature's role is equally very important, as we need healthy oceans, and Ms. Garçon specifically referred to the EU biodiversity strategy and the nature restoration law. At the same time, we need effective management as a key driver for sustainability, and last but not least, well-informed and science-based policy making. So thank you very much for making these points. Our next speaker is Mr. Yannis Pelekanakis, who is connected online on behalf of FEAP, the Federation of European Aquaculture Producers. So seamlessly, I would like to give you the floor for your presentation. Thank you for being with us today.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. We'd like to thank you for organizing this event and for inviting FEAP. My name is Yannis Pelekanakis. I'm working for the Hellenic Aquaculture Producers Organizations, and here I'm representing FEAP as we follow also the works of the European Parliament. Briefly, and for those that don't know, FEAP stands for the Federation of European Aquaculture Producers. Its main objective is to promote the sustainable development of aquaculture and to improve the competitiveness of European aquaculture producers. It is a European federation composed of 24 national fish farming associations, representing also non-EU countries with significant production, such as Norway and Turkey, and we represent all the main species that are farmed in the EU. Next slide, please. The next one as well, we'll just pass that. All right. So aquaculture in the EU struggles to expand its production and follow the growth rate of the rest of the world to cover the increasing demands for fish protein and provide healthy products with lower environmental footprint. However, the sustainability of the sector is at stake due to the predicted effects of climate change that presents a reality demonstrating challenges to the existing aquaculture production system. Climate change is expected to lead significant changes in the availability and trade of aquatic food products with potentially geopolitical and economic consequences. The implication of climate change on European aquaculture producers, local communities and countries will depend on their exposure, sensitivity and adaptive capacity. There is indeed a major risk because aquaculture production mainly takes place in territorial waters and aquaculture operators are highly vulnerable and depend from appropriate special planning and governance. Overall, I would say that the consequence of climate change on the sector will be determined by the sector's capacity and innovate and adapt, special planning and governance, and from a customer's point of view, making responsible choices at purchase point to contribute to carbon neutrality. Next slide, please. We expect impacts on both physical and biological environment affecting the production and the markets. When it comes to the production, we see large-scale loss of production and infrastructure from extreme events, floods and sea storms. We have seen recently examples in the EU. Spain lost almost 40% of its production in 2020. We expect fish feed raw material availability to be more scarce. Changes in temperature and ocean acidification, increased risk of diseases, frequent harmful algal blooms and sea hypoxia events, and on the long run, we might experience reduced precipitation leading to increasing competition for freshwater. On the markets and the supply chain, climate change impacts will lead to weakening of food security and self-sufficiency rates to cover domestic demand, and also their financial sustainability risk will have additional costs along the value chain without being able to pass it to the end user. Next slide, please. Now let's shed some light to climate change, adaptation, and how we can alter the aquaculture production system to become more resilient to the impacts of the climate change and maintain its environmental and economical sustainability. We would say that adaptation starts with, first of all, a good understanding of aquaculture dependence on the natural environment and a reliable assessment of climate impacts at global levels. This is something that's missing. When it comes to fish farmers, to increase resilience, adjustment, we need to work on adjustment of fish farming, management and husbandry, diversification of species, selected breeding to build biological resilient stocks, and improved and adaptive biosecurity to monitor fish health. When it comes to public administration and governance, we need to adopt licensing framework and special planning to enable and accelerate the implementation of adaptation measures. It is already foreseen and covered through the multi-annual management plans and the new operational programs. We witnessed that there are countries with strong progress on adaptation planning and others with very poor profiles in the EU. Of course, facilitated the diversification of farm species suitable to new environmental conditions and adapt insurance schemes. Next slide, please. When it comes to climate change mitigation, I would like to highlight that practically aquaculture is one more victim of climate change. As the chairman said at the beginning of the session, aquatic species production has a lower carbon footprint than any terrestrial livestock. Aquaculture is a small contributor of greenhouse gas emissions, but still options exist for avoiding and reducing energy use and greenhouse gas emissions. Aquaculture operations should focus on strategic and operational changes to reduce emissions along the life cycle from aquafood production through to the product distribution to the end user. And the main options for options for high volume reduction in greenhouse gas emission in aquaculture came from changes in fish food production, transport, and power inputs. Next slide, please. And final slide. There are actions to be taken at farm level, such as improved production technologies to increase efficiency, decarbonize farming facilities, operations, and vessels, and the use of renewable energy sources for pumping, oxygen general systems, and cover all the operations of aquaculture production. And furthermore, actions can be taken at sectoral level and promote innovation with holistic view. I would like to finish this presentation by saying that FEAP is involved in Future Aqua, which is a Horizon 2020 research project pursuing genetic resilience towards a changing climate, production of vulnerable feed, including low trophic ingredients, monitoring health and welfare, and overall in order to adapt aquaculture in the climate change. Of course, needless to say that successful implementation of mitigation action depends on the driving force, which is good consumer perception and their willingness to choose sustainable aquatic food and contribute to carbon neutrality. Thank you very much, and we look forward to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pelekanakis, for your insightful presentation and also for your work on driving the successful adaptation of European fish farming to climate change and its contribution to low-carbon diets. We heard from Mr. Pelekanakis about climate change impacts on aquaculture production and markets, key adaptation measures both by public administration and governance, but also by fish farmers in order to increase resilience. And also, last but not least, some key mitigation actions, once again, both at farm, but also sectorial level. So thank you very much for making these points across. Our next speaker is Dr. Rafaela de Leguvelo, expert at IUCN Ecosystem-Based Aquaculture Specialist Group, and is with us today electronically. So thank you very much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Should I share the screen or do you handle it, Regine? Okay. So do you see it? That's fine? Yeah? Okay. So today, I'm very glad to be here and thank you for the invitation. I'm representing the IUCN as an expert and working independently on myself particularly on aquaculture sustainability and also fisheries and coastal systems. So we are in this critical context. Next slide, please. Yeah. In the critical context of climate change and biodiversity decline, there is today really a need, yes, to find new approach to do a better job. And the importance of as we heard, of aquaculture is recognized in the world in seafood production, but also where the importance of marine conservation and social economic issues are also quite acknowledged. So in that particular situation, the IUCN, we have initiated a work for a long time on the sustainability of aquaculture systems. And we think that there is a need to reconcile nature conservation and sustainable development, including aquaculture as a component. And also because aquaculture remains on the good health of ecosystems most of the time. The IUCN program with François Simard and myself and some other independent experts and also EBCD here organizing this event. We have initiated this program, and since 2015, we've been able to work, for instance, to explore synergies between aquaculture, conservation, and coastal communities. And we have been able to document 4 case studies: seaweed farming in Zanzibar, marine fish farming in Tunisia, in cage system, polyculture pond system in Indonesia, and the giant clam culture in French Polynesia. And since this, next slide. Yeah. And since a couple of years, we have also, in parallel with this work, collecting, exploring case studies of marine conservation and aquaculture, we've been exploring the global standard of nature-based solution as an opportunity to further examine the sustainability of aquaculture systems. So the concept of nature-based solution was actually quite discussed at the last during this present COP. And this concept of NBS is gaining momentum around the world as a new approach to achieve sustainable development. And in 2016, the IUCN defined NBS as actions to protect, sustainability, manage, and restore natural and modified ecosystems in ways that address societal challenges effectively and adaptively to provide both human well-being and biodiversity benefits. And in 2020, you can see here on the screen, the IUCN released the NBS Global Standard with a set of 8 criteria, indicators that help to design, assess, strengthen, and upscale NBS interventions. So next, we've been exploring this global standard for nature-based solution for aquaculture systems. We looked at the 8 criteria proposed in the global standard and compared them to the existing work on the tools and related to the sustainability of aquaculture, identifying challenges and opportunities, maybe opportunities for new ways of thinking things. For instance, how aquaculture would address the 7 main societal challenges that are listed here in the criterion 1 of the global standard. Most of the time, aquaculture productions are only targeting food security purposes and social economic development. But on the other hand, they may be detrimental to other challenges, such as ecosystem integrity or some social challenges as well. So next slide, please. Yeah. So how can we actually make better use of the identification, exploration of ecosystem services linked to aquaculture, and thus perhaps also contribute to better accessibility, better development of aquaculture in Europe? Aquaculture systems are recognized, as we heard, very vulnerable to climate change, but also we heard they may play a role in climate mitigation. For instance, the blue carbon trapped in cultivated seaweeds is now recognized. Freshwater aquaculture ponds, as an example, could combine food security goals, biodiversity net gains, addressing water supply and water quality challenges as well. Next slide, please. So in, for instance, the criterion 3, which is a real challenge for aquaculture. You know, how do we get a net biodiversity net gain with aquaculture? That means that aquaculture production not only minimize their environmental impacts, but may contribute to a positive biodiversity net gain. For instance, how much habitat benefits linked to shellfish, seaweed, and even sea cage farming system can be identified and enhanced. We have to look at systems, new systems, innovative systems, or traditional systems like innovative, like multi-trophic aquaculture system, regenerative aquaculture, restorative aquaculture, low trophic aquaculture. Any other potential example which are potentially interesting new NBS, including aquaculture. So, for instance, we have a next slide, please. Yeah, we had last September this very interesting event organized by the DG Mare with the blue economy integrating aquaculture. And examples were given recently at this event on IMTA, integrated multi-trophic aquaculture, and restorative shellfish cultures in Brittany, in France, in Ireland, in Scotland. And also another example. Next slide, please. Yes, for instance, a very traditional way of viticulture in Italy, which also is part of a Natura 2000 zone and plays a role in birds migration. So we see, you know, multi-targeted aquaculture systems. So next slide, please. So the idea is here, you know, new conceptual and operational frameworks, such as the NBS one, may provide opportunities to improve the sustainability of existing aquaculture protections, clarifying some critical issues related to aquaculture development. And they may also provide guidance for the development of a new type of aquaculture project specifically designed as NBS, and further enhancing synergies between and mutual benefits between aquaculture, nature conservation, and the climate mitigation, and therefore fitting also in the blue economy strategies. So to conclude, next final slide, please. I want to thank you, and I think aquaculture will play a major role in providing seafood, inventing new blue and healthy foods. And also, yes, Pierre, I agree with you, it should be done with other actors, particularly in the fishing sector at sea, in agriculture sectors as well, renewable energy as well, food processing industry and so on. So it has to be on a sort of a very integrated approach and based on regional also initiatives as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gouvelot, for your very informative presentation, for joining us today, and for sharing a lot of your key expertise with regards to making aquaculture work for conservation, climate, and food security. At this point, I would like to set a reminder for our attendees today. I see there is a lot of audience connected online, so don't be shy. You can send us in your questions via the platform, so we can take as many as possible during the Q&A session, and you can do that via using the Q&A's box at the right-hand side of your screen. Looking at the event's agenda, last but not least, I would like to provide the floor to Mr. Vothes Theoinandi, Managing Director on behalf of Europes. And of course, we have heard a lot about decarbonization, and decarbonizing the fishing industry is a very important point in this discussion today. So we've heard some thoughts about challenges ahead, but what about solutions, and how shall we best overcome these barriers?
Thank you, Elias, and thank you to the Intergroup organizing this interesting event on climate negotiations. But it's also relevant to talk about how to decarbonize the fishing industry, the challenges that we have, and also the solutions that we may have ahead. Next slide, please. First of all, I would like to send a reminder about wild-caught fish, as defined by a former CEO from Oceana, is the perfect protein. There's a whole book about this. And why he said that? Because the fish, they live freely in the oceans, and the fishermen, they just harvest them when needed. As also reminded by Mr. Kaleskins, is one of the lowest carbon footprint in terms of food production, and this we share with colleagues from aquaculture. So fish and seafood is not only good for the health of humans, but it's also good for climate protection because it's one of the best options in terms of food security. When it comes to energy consumption, we also have good news. According to STCF, in the last decade, we have decreased our emissions by 17%. And looking at the data from the reported by the Commission and the member states under the Protocol of Kyoto, if we take data from the 90s, we also see that actually the reduction of emissions is down by 48% already. I think this is really good news. Next slide, please. But obviously, we facing many ocean threats, and according to the study that you can see in the slide, the most significant ones are the increase of sea surface temperature, ocean acidification, and the sea level rise. But still, next slide, please. But still, fishing has also an impact in the oceans, and obviously we are responsible for that, and we have to do everything in our hand to lower our impact. And according to scientists, we need to transition into a new era for the fishing industry, and we have to move towards zero emission energy sources. We also need to improve how our vessels operate, how to mitigate our impact in the ocean, the design of the fishing gears, for instance. We also need to reduce the time that we spend at sea to burn less fuel. We need healthy fish stocks, and also to better understand the trade-offs between the catches and the fuel that we're using for that purpose. Next slide, please. But within this scenario, we have been investing heavily on this transition already. There's a whole report from ICES, and you can see in the slide, for instance, bottom trawling doors, that they are no longer touching the bottom of the sea. This is not only good for the environment, this is also good for the reduction of the fuel consumption. You will have, the PowerPoint will be distributed. I just wanted to show this during the meeting, but you will have the time to read this at home whenever you have time. Next slide, please. We have also improved our energy efficiency. Just a few examples that you can see in the slide. For instance, one of our trawlers in the Netherlands is using shore power for the use of electrical energy on board of the fishing vessel. We have also building new innovative fishing vessels with hybrid engines, and we're using more environmentally friendly refrigerants on board of our vessels, but also in the cold storage on land. Next slide, please. We also contributing to the circular economy. We are not only collecting marine litter in our fishing operations, but we also reusing and recycling the materials that we have on board, making sure that they are coming from environmentally friendly sources. So obviously, I think this is also good news. We also involved in the evolution of circular gears within the Committee for Standardization. So there are many initiatives out there. Next slide, please. As Europass, we're also looking at new ways of fishing. Actually, we have signed a memorandum of understanding with a company from Norway called Innomar. They have developed some fishing traps that they place in the bottom of the ocean that can be placed next to wind farms or fish farms to catch fish. And they attract the fish with light. And when there is enough fish in these traps, then there's a buoy on top that is calling a fishing vessel that is actually powered with electric propulsion. So yes, we're actually looking at new ways of fishing to make this transition possible. Next slide, please. But we also have some limitations. When organizations are telling us not to use fuel oil for our operations and to use other alternative propulsion power, if we look at this slide, we see that these technologies, they require more space on board. If we're talking about 1 cubic meter of traditional fuel oil, if we want to convert this into liquefied gas, we need almost double the space on board. That's for storage. And if we're talking about hydrogen, it's more than 4 times the space that we need on board. Not to talk about the dimension of the new engine that would be required. Next slide, please. And obviously, we have fishing capacity limitations in the European Union. And this not only apply for this purpose of the energy changes, but also for better working conditions on board, more space in the cabins, in the toilets, etc. All this is considered as fishing capacity space and is limited. So this is actually something that we really need to look at. Next slide, please. Other challenges that we have in current policy proposals and technology, the European Commission is proposing the taxation of fuel, even though WTO just took a decision that the taxation schemes of the European Union are perfectly legal. The IMO is also considering carbon levies for maritime sectors. We also have a little bit of a chicken and the egg situation when it comes to these new technologies and new biofuels. They are either not available in commercial quantities, or they are either in a pilot phase. So without having this technology and biofuels in a commercial quantity, you cannot generate the demand. It's simply too expensive. So this is something that we really need to consider. Also, if we look at the new fisheries fund, we see that it's not fit for purpose when it comes to the modernization of the fleet, if we're really considering new technologies. And if we apply all these technologies to under 12 meters, it's actually even more challenging. Last slide, please. So now the Commission is gathering some evidence and intelligence on how to accelerate this transition. Our preliminary conclusions would be that we need a specific fund. I don't know if Horizon 2021, 2027 would be the right one, but perhaps we need a new one to make this happen and possible. We need to invest in science. This is incredibly important for us. When we talk about science, it's not just the analysis, the normal analysis of science about the environmental impacts, but we need a group of experts. I'm talking about naval architects, I'm talking about engineers, I'm going to talk about IT guys and girls in the same room, talking together to see how can we make this possible. We have several measures, biofuels, innovation. We also need port infrastructures to make this happen. So that would be for us really interesting. We need to continue investing and enhancing circular economy in our fishing vessels and how the way we operate. We need to look at new efficiencies on our vessels. For us, we need to revise. I don't have the final solution on what fishing capacity measurement do we need for the European Union, but this is something that we can certainly look at now in the evaluation of the CFP. We need to consider the specificities of under 12-meter vessels, and for us now with the fuel prices and without having a real alternative for traditional oil fuel, the taxation of fuel is not a reality for the fishing industry. So with this, next slide, please. I thank you very much to the group, and I'll open it to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Voces, for highlighting the relevant angles on healthy diets and food security, but also for making the point on efforts and examples for decarbonization, innovation, energy consumption, and climate protection. On this note, I would like to thank all speakers connected either on site or online for all your intervention in today's event. And although we are running late in terms of time, good news is that the room is available for some more minutes, so we can take advantage of that while moving forward to the interactive part of the discussion. Looking at the agenda of the event, there is now coming up the Q&A session with the audience. So perhaps we can start with any burning questions from participants in the room. So you can please open the microphone, introduce yourselves, and pose the question to the speakers. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Is it working? Yeah. Hi, I'm Eva. I'm a legal intern at the environmental department of the German Perm-Rep. And I've been working on the nature restoration law, which has been mentioned. So my question would be, I've seen in these council sessions, a lot of member states were concerned about how the new nature restoration law, which is great, is interfering with the common fishery policies. So maybe could you maybe elaborate, maybe Isabella, so thank you so much for your words on how you see that maybe the common fishery policies need to be revised in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this question on the link between nature restoration law and CFP. I'm just wondering if speakers in the room or online are interested in taking this question.
I think it was supposed to be, but
Yes.
Well, thank you for your question. I'm not really familiar with, I didn't analyze in detail the new proposal on nature restoration law and the links with the CFP, but for us, as any environmental law that has a cross-sectoral nature, and looking at the CFP that is more targeted for fisheries, it has to be a balance. And in the CFP, the balance is environment, economics, and social. So whenever we're talking about restoration law, we also need to analyze the possible impact of the CFP. If the idea is to go back to the, I think it's the 70s, the threshold that or the 60s, that we have to recover nature or take the nature back to the area of the 60s, what we need is the data to compare. And this is essential for us. I don't know if that data is available, how were the oceans passed in the 60s or the 50s or in the 900. But first, we need a threshold to compare and where are we going with this. And second, we will need to have a look at all the environmental, socioeconomic impact, including fishing. I think it was mentioned here by several speakers that we are all in a nature crisis, but also in a food security crisis. The European Union is taking the lead on producing its own food. We cannot depend on third countries. Like when the COVID crisis happened, we were dependent on China for the masks. I don't think we should be depending on third countries like China for food production. So I think all these factors need to be taken into consideration. And of course, the environment is really important for us, and fishermen want to have a healthy environment to continue operating. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. It's one of the fundamental points and questions that we have ahead of us. And this is why the Commission here is going to produce a specific action plan. The action plan on biodiversity and fisheries is to a great extent geared at proposing ways of compatibilizing positively the interaction between protection of marine areas and restoring. So protection and restoration is not the same thing. I'm not a specialist into restoration law, so I mentioned it, but in any case, we also have the protection 30% objective to work on, and how fishing activities need to be either stopped or can be, and under what conditions, compatible with protection of ecosystems. When I say fishing, we can also obviously, we should also obviously include aquaculture. So we're working on that. We are about to publish the proposal. Just to give you an example, we're very used to that, to compatibilizing and seeing the benefits of protecting ecosystems, even from fishing activities or aquaculture activities. This is in the Mediterranean Sea. Beyond any national jurisdiction, one of the key tools of the GFCM under the FAO umbrella, cooperating with third countries of the South Mediterranean South, is to close areas. And there are lots and increasing numbers of areas in the Mediterranean seas where any fishing activities and sometimes any human activities are authorized, I mean, banned. And over the years, we've seen that a key source of regeneration of fishing stocks, recovering of fishing stocks, which are overall in a dramatic state, are indeed these protected areas. So we have experience for how to compatibilize, but this is quite complex. It's place-based, it's fisheries type based, so it's quite complex. And that's why the Commission was called on in a way, but committed as well under the Green Deal to further investigate, and we'll try to make the best out of its consultation, thinking, experience, contributions received, to outline a few ways of protecting, restoring waste, accompanying fisheries and to the benefit of fisheries, maybe asking efforts from fisheries, but ultimately being based on experience, knowing that it brings positive results in terms of healthier fishing stocks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Voces and Ms. Garzón, for your replies. Is there perhaps any other question from the room?
Thank you. Tobias Zoll from Seas at Risk, the European umbrella of NGOs defending the ocean. Thanks a lot for this interesting gathering this morning. Just to say that we find it unfortunate that the NGO representative, which I still saw to be confirmed in an earlier version of the program, kind of disappeared. So I think it would be nice for future gatherings like this also to make sure that a balanced stakeholder representation is ensured in the speaking interventions. So nevertheless, I'm very happy to take the floor now. And I think the question which we just heard was a very relevant one, because the nature restoration law is certainly an important milestone in bringing back nature, restoring nature. But in particular, when it comes to fisheries, we are quite concerned about the implementation, in particular in relation to Article 11, as we know that the lengthy and often inefficient process of developing joint recommendations to then actually implement specific measures on the ground is very ineffective and doesn't lead to results. And also getting back to what Mr. Kaliskin said in the beginning, recalling the hope, a paradigm from the 2014 Healthy Ocean Productive Ecosystems. Unfortunately, and I think we all agree, we don't have a healthy ocean. Good environmental status spectacularly failed by the 2020 deadline. And they're also less and less productive. I mean, the Baltic Sea, for example, is pretty dead now, or well, not entirely dead, but in terms of fisheries, I mean, the quotas are basically approaching zero, which led to a whole collapse of traditional fisheries industry and so on. So, sorry to get back to you again, Mrs. Garzón, but I'm very interested to hear how the upcoming action plan is in complementarity with the nature restoration law. So that challenge of the Article 11, that's something you intend to address through the action plan, which hopefully will come out finally beginning of next year. That's the latest information we have after 2 years of delay. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, there is no 2 years of delay. It has been scheduled for 2022. So as far as I know, we're still
about 1 year.
2022. No, but rendezvous at after reading the action plan. I'm not going to tell you. I cannot tell you what's the content of the action plan, since it has not been yet adopted by the Commission. So, but of course, Article 11. As part of the also implementation, I mean, one of the issues of implementation of the CFP is under review from different angles and from different or for different purposes in terms of commission publication. So this is what I can tell you. Of course, Article 11 is part of the exercise.
Thank you very much for your reply. And just if I may come in on the NGO point, I think that's a very important point to be raised, as it's very meaningful on behalf of the Secretariat of the Intergroup to ensure a balanced discussion today. Of course, when it comes to events organization, and I guess that in previous versions of the draft agenda, you might have seen 3 different speakers and organizations in TBC that we have reached to back, and of course the reason behind their disappearance, is unfortunately the lack of positive replies received. So that is the reason for this point on behalf of the Secretariat of the Intergroup today. Is there perhaps any other question from the room? Yes.
Thanks very much for this event. So, I work for Oceana, another NGO. I'd like to pick up on a point raised by Mrs. Garzon on spatial protection, because when it comes to blue food and decarbonizing the footprint, there are 2 elements when it comes to fisheries. One is the fuel emissions, and I was pleased to hear from Mr. Vossès the fact that it's quoting an Oceana a book about fish being the perfect protein, and that's true. However, there are great variation between species and also according to fishing practices. I mean, we know that when it comes to bottom trawling or dredges, I mean, it's quite fuel intensive. And so the footprint of certain fish is actually higher. On average, I think it's almost 3 times, compared to non-active gears. And some of these species are even higher compared to other foodstuff like meat. So there are variations, but the other element is also the disturbance from the seabed, the carbon stores. I mean, ocean sediments are the largest store on the planet for carbon, and you touched upon the point of spatial protection. So we have MPAs and other areas that are closed, but we know one of the main issues is that those MPAs are fished by destructive gears like bottom trawling, which basically releases the sediment. So, I mean, the first and a bit provocative question would be to ask it hasn't been touched upon the presentation from Europesh, like what's your position on when it comes to the disturbance of carbon stores in the seabed, in MPAs in the first place, but also beyond. I mean, there's been also research on other areas. There's been also ICES advice on those trade-offs. There are areas that are marginally fished, which have a potential to sequester carbon and store it. And the cost benefits of not fishing those areas is actually high on the benefits, and the cost is really low. It's quite interesting. I hope that indeed the Commission is looking into this when it comes to plan, but also when it comes to working under the MSFD. I mean, there's a whole discussion on threshold values of seabed protection, but I think it's good to have those 2 elements. On one hand, the emission, but also the disturbance. And we know that, I mean, I'll just use in Spain, I mean, 80% of the seagrass, so the blue carbon, are located inside Natura 2000 MPAs, which we know are heavily impacted by bottom fishing. So those blue carbons that are, the most like win-win habitats for climate, for fish nursery, for habitat protection, they're also the one mostly impacted by fishing. So there's a critical issue to address here. So I just wanted to maybe ask Mr. Vossès about this, because it hasn't been touched upon the presentation, but if any other of the speaker would be interested to bring this. So thanks a lot.
Mr. Vossès?
Well, thank you for your question. I see that NGOs, they were not invited, but still having a whole presentation on this. Now, I really appreciated, Nicola, all your questions as always. Concerning the fuel emissions, that you said that there's different ranges based on the fishing gear, that is true. Nobody's challenging that. Actually, one of the links that I put in the first slide is to one of the studies by Rail Hilborn on the issue, but on average, they're even below what is produced inland. So even with trawling or dredging, is even below, or shrimp fishery is even below meat production. So on average, I have to say that we're still performing better. And then if you go for other fishing techniques, even some of them, they are heavily criticized, like purseine. Well, then the environmental impact is lower, but still criticized and planned to be banned by some NGOs. On the carbon sink, I cannot touch upon all the issues, obviously, in my presentation. And you mentioned that the MPAs, they are fished by bottom trawlers, etc. I think there's not enough science. Even in the ICES advice that you mentioned, they recognize that there is not enough science about carbon sinks. In the international studies that we have checked, IPCC and etc., we actually presented this to the European Commission, both DG Environment and DG Mare, and they had no idea about these carbon sinks. They have some estimates, but that is the reality. And actually, we cannot regulate based on general statements. We have to go into the sea, and we have to look where they are. And if they are in areas and they need to be protected, so be it. But we need a specific scientific study on every single area about this. ICES is actually also recognizing the lack of resolution when it comes to the definition of these carbon sinks. We have the same problem with the implementing act from the deep sea regulation. There's actually huge squares identifying areas that it may be the case that part of it may be protected, but the problem is that the resolution is huge and the buffer zone is even bigger. So if we really need to have these trade-offs that you mentioned between food production and environmental protection, we really need to look first at the definition and second at the data. You mentioned the Spanish case. I can proudly say that our members from CEPESCA and Cofradías, they are both participating in biodiversity studies together with NGOs to identify areas for MPA protection. You mentioned that bottom trawling is being used in seagrass areas. The problem that we have with your study from Oceana is that you're using AIS information and not VMS. So again, we're facing an issue where, yes, you're locating fishing vessels passing by certain areas, but they may not be fishing in that area, and that is one of the shortcomings of that study that that we have identified. So this is all that I have to say at the point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as I think that there is certain time limitations, my only last question for all speakers is, if you were to tweet about this event today, what would be your key takeaway? Maybe in one or two phrases, what would you like the audience to take home today after this event? So perhaps following the sequence of the agenda, we can start with the European Commission, Ms. Garzón, if there is any takeaway messages there today.
I think I'm positively struck by the convergence on views on the need of adaptation, the relatively general consensus on the existence of solutions, but also a great sense of little bit gravity on the challenges and that remain, and therefore the importance of all rolling up their sleeves to accelerate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just being informed that the FAO speaker unfortunately could not make it for the last step of the event, for the last part of that. So then, looking at the agenda, Mr. Pelekanakis, any takeaway messages from your side?
Sure. Right, I'm muted. when it comes to the aquaculture sector and the producer's point of view, definitely we need a flexible and more competitive licensing framework, enabling, proper siting collection in order to mitigate the impact of climate change. And then definitely we need to look up measures at farm level and government level to maintain our environmental and financial sustainability in order to keep on providing sustainable food.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pelekanakis. And Ms. Legouvello, perhaps some concluding thoughts from your side?
Yeah, well, I'm always surprised to see, how the sectors of fisheries and aquaculture are quite disconnected, in fact. So I would advocate for a better understanding and a better integrated approach of all these sectors related to the marine ecosystems and their health. And I think that there are synergies definitely to be explored between all these sectors and also marine conservation issues. So I would advocate. So I presented one positive tool like NBS that could be a way to find win-win solution, but win-win solution not only for the economic sectors, but also for the marine preservation and the coastal communities. So I hope we can go on and have a better, more positive approach to these very complex problems.
Thank you very much, Ms. Legouvello, and perhaps Mr. Vothes, some thoughts from your side too.
Yeah, thank you, Elias. Before finalizing with a couple of 2 sentences, concluding remarks, just on the remarks from previous speakers, we also, in order to analyze this trade-off between fishing and fuel consumption and greenhouse emissions, etc., we also need to look at the catch per unit of effort. So if we look at trawling and then comparing trawling with another gear, perhaps the emissions are higher, but perhaps it's more efficient than having 2 or 3 vessels using other gears. And so you will require more fishing trips, and then you will require to be more fishermen, etc. So we cannot generalize. We have to look at the individual impact of vessels and also of the fleet segments, because if we are not producing enough food, it will be imported from a third country, and obviously it will have a higher impact on the environment. So we will be just exporting our environmental debt. As concluding remarks, keep eating fish. It's good for your health and it's good for your planet. And the second one, decarbonization is possible, but we need to perhaps revise policies and continue investing in science. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vothes. And reflecting on speakers' interventions and key takeaways, I think your replies would make actually an excellent Twitter thread. So thank you very much for being with us today. And of course, a warm thanks goes out to all attendees of the event on site and online for their active engagement with regards to addressing today's topic. Well, it was made clear in the beginning of the event in the opening remarks of hosting MEP, Mr. Pierre Karleskind, that have officially entered the climate negotiations. And I think today's discussion serves to point that there is a key role to play there. Of course, we heard that in the course of the event that fisheries and aquaculture are heavily impacted by the consequences of climate change on marine biodiversity and ocean infrastructures. But at the same time, they have the potential to contribute to climate solutions by identifying and adopting a number of mitigation and adaptation options. So it's been also very insightful and inspiring to hear from speakers about the role of blue foods and what they can concretely do for the climate, contributing to low carbon diets. Wrapping up, I would just like to echo some main messages. As in order to achieve the blue transformation mentioned by FAO and Ms. Agostini, we need aquatic food systems to be at the center of climate solutions. And we heard that from Ms. Garson. To do that, we need well-informed and science-based policy making. That is key. We have to seek for collaboration opportunities and partnerships, empower and implement and focus on nature-based solutions. I believe that nature's role is key to play as was highlighted also by the European Commission, we need healthy oceans. And of course, there are still challenges to be addressed, but I think today we've all come to agree on the need to promote decarbonization, accelerate the transition. So once again, thanks to the European Commission for taking the lead on that. We also heard that effective management is a key driver for sustainability, as we also need to address the nexus of climate change, oceans, and biodiversity. So I hope this event today has served to send a strong signal concerning all various angles, from conservation, climate, and food security, but also the need to keep raising awareness about ocean-related challenges and solutions ahead when we're discussing about ongoing, but also upcoming climate. So once again, it's been a real pleasure welcoming you to today's event. And I think driven by such momentum, I'm sure that we'll be able to continue discussions in the near future. So until then, all the best and see you very soon. Thank you for being with us today.